The boxing world has been buzzing with speculation, excitement, and a fair share of frustration over the latest developments surrounding Canelo Alvarez and his potential fights. Just when fans thought they were on the brink of witnessing an all-time great showdown between Canelo Alvarez and Terence "Bud" Crawford, a new contender entered the mix: Jake Paul. The mere possibility of this fight has sent shockwaves across the sport, and many are questioning whether Canelo's pursuit of a match with Paul is jeopardizing the highly anticipated clash with Crawford. For months, discussions had been heating up around the idea of Canelo taking on Terence Crawford, a fight that would pit one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters against one of the most technically skilled boxers of this generation. Crawford has been eager to prove himself against a bigger opponent, and Canelo, ever the risk-taker, seemed willing to take on the challenge. Talks were progressing, and reports even suggested that Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas was being eyed as the battleground for what would undoubtedly be one of the biggest fights in modern boxing history. Then, out of nowhere, the name Jake Paul started circulating in connection with Canelo. The YouTube star-turned-boxer has built a controversial career, drawing both praise and criticism for his role in bringing new eyes to the sport. While some argue that he has injected fresh energy into boxing, others see his presence as nothing more than a circus act. The idea of Canelo, one of the sport's most accomplished warriors, stepping into the ring with Paul sent a ripple of disbelief through the boxing community. And now, it seems like that ripple has turned into a tidal wave of confirmation. Prominent boxing promoter Eddie Hearn recently made a statement that sent fans into a frenzy. According to Hearn, the move to fight Jake Paul might have derailed Canelo's fight with Crawford. That's right, one of the most anticipated matchups in recent memory may have been pushed aside for a fight with an internet sensation. The logic behind this move, at least from a financial standpoint, isn't difficult to understand. In terms of sheer marketability and mainstream appeal, a fight between Canelo and Jake Paul is a money-printing machine. Paul's enormous following, combined with Canelo's star power, makes this a spectacle that could generate staggering pay-per-view numbers. But at what cost? The reaction from boxing purists has been swift and harsh. Many believe that Canelo choosing Jake Paul over Crawford diminishes the integrity of the sport. While Crawford has earned his shot through years of dominance, Paul's rise has been fueled more by showmanship than pure boxing skill. The backlash only intensified when it was revealed that His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh, the Saudi Arabian figure behind many of the recent high-profile fights, does not view fights like Paul vs Canelo as legitimate boxing matches. Instead, he categorizes them as entertainment spectacles rather than true competitive bouts. With Saudi Arabia playing a significant role in securing major boxing events, Al-Sheikh's perspective carries weight. He has reportedly been deeply involved in the negotiations for Canelo vs Crawford and was even working on securing Allegiant Stadium as the venue. But now, with Canelo apparently entertaining an offer from Jake Paul, those plans might be unraveling. The concern is that Canelo's willingness to engage in discussions with Paul is signaling to key stakeholders that he is not fully committed to the Crawford fight. And let us not forget Jake Paul's own role in fueling these rumors. In a recent appearance on the Impulsive podcast, Paul teased an upcoming fight, calling it the craziest thing of all time. He doubled down on the hype, claiming that this fight would be bigger than his previously announced bout with Mike Tyson. Given all the pieces falling into place, it's becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss the notion that Paul vs Canelo is more than just a wild rumor. It may very well be a done deal. If this fight does happen, the boxing world is in for a massive shake-up. From a business perspective, it makes perfect sense. Canelo vs Paul will sell. But from a sporting perspective, it raises a lot of troubling questions. Will this fight take precedence over the Crawford bout? Will it set a precedent where elite-level boxers are more incentivized to chase celebrity fights rather than true legacy-defining battles? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of the sport? Many fans and analysts are hoping that this is nothing more than a temporary distraction, that once the dust settles, Canelo will refocus his efforts on making the Crawford fight happen. After all, the legacy of a fighter like Canelo Alvarez should be defined by facing the best of the best, not by engaging in a crossover spectacle with an influencer-turned-boxer. But if the fight with Paul is indeed finalized, it will send a clear message that boxing is evolving into an entirely new era, one where entertainment value often outweighs the purity of competition. For now, all eyes are on Canelo Alvarez. The decisions he makes in the coming days will have a lasting impact, not just on his career, but on the sport as a whole. Will he take the path of legacy and face Crawford in a fight for the ages, or will he choose the path of spectacle, stepping into the ring with Jake Paul for what will undoubtedly be one of the most talked about fights in recent history? One thing is for certain: whatever happens next will have the boxing world talking for years to come. Canelo Alvarez has always been the face of boxing, the name that echoes through arenas and headlines worldwide. Every time he steps into the ring, there's an air of anticipation, a feeling that something legendary is about to happen. For years, fans have clamored for the biggest fights possible, the matchups that will define eras and cement legacies. One of those potential fights has always been Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford, a battle between two of the sport's most elite fighters, a clash of styles, skills, and determination. Yet, here we are, witnessing the landscape shift in a way that not everyone expected. The boxing world is buzzing with speculation, excitement, and, for some, frustration. Instead of the anticipated showdown with Crawford, Canelo seems to be heading in a completely different direction, straight into a high-profile fight with none other than Jake Paul. Yes, Jake Paul, the YouTube sensation turned boxing attraction. For purists, it's a shocking turn of events. For business minds, it makes complete sense. And for fans, well, that depends on where their loyalties lie. Let's break it down. Canelo vs Crawford was set to be a fight for the ages, two highly skilled technicians, pound-for-pound greats, squaring off in what would have been an ultimate test of will and talent. But let's be real, financially, it wasn't the biggest fight available. And in boxing, money talks. No matter how much respect exists for pure competition, the numbers dictate the fights we get. Enter Jake Paul. Like it or not, he is a marketing machine. He generates headlines, pay-per-view buys, and mainstream attention in a way that few boxers can. His fights transcend the sport, bringing in a completely different audience: casual fans, social media followers, and those who wouldn't normally tune into a boxing match. That level of attention converts into massive financial opportunities. And Canelo, well, he's a businessman as much as he is a fighter. He knows the reality of boxing economics. A fight against Jake Paul is simply bigger in terms of revenue. Think about it, Canelo vs Crawford would be a battle of two warriors, but in terms of marketability, it's one megastar Canelo versus a phenomenal fighter who, despite his greatness, doesn't quite have the mainstream appeal Crawford. Meanwhile, Canelo vs Jake Paul is a showdown between two household names, two fighters who command audiences beyond just hardcore boxing fans. One is a proven legend, the other a social media disruptor who has made his way into the sport and carved out a name for himself. Whether you love Jake Paul or hate him, you can't deny that he moves the needle. So, does that mean the dream fight with Crawford is dead? Not necessarily. But it does put a massive roadblock in the way. If Canelo is truly entertaining a Jake Paul fight for May, it's hard to see him committing to a Crawford bout soon after. That means the window of opportunity for Canelo vs Crawford just got smaller and possibly shut entirely. And that's where the frustration comes in. For boxing purists, this is disheartening. They wanted to see Canelo test himself against another pound-for-pound great to give the fans a true super fight that isn't driven by spectacle but by sheer skill. The disappointment isn't about Jake Paul himself but rather what his presence represents, a shift in priorities. The boxing world has always had its fair share of crossover fights, but they've typically been one-offs, side attractions rather than the main course. But now, with Jake Paul securing fights against legends like Mike Tyson and potentially Canelo Alvarez, it feels like the sport is heading into a new era, one where spectacle sometimes takes precedence over substance. That being said, it's not hard to understand why Canelo would take this fight. It's an easy payday, a guaranteed spectacle, and a fight that will bring in record-breaking numbers. He could walk into the ring, do his job, and walk out with a check bigger than what he'd likely make against Crawford. And after that, who knows, maybe he finally steps into the ring with Crawford. Maybe he moves on to another massive payday against someone else. The point is, his options remain open. There's also the issue of timing. The dates for a potential Canelo-Crawford showdown were closing fast. September 13th, a date many assumed would be perfect for a fight of this magnitude, is now unavailable, locked in for another event. September 20th is still an option, but the closer we get to that date, the more likely it is that another major event swoops in and claims it. So what does that mean for Crawford if this fight truly doesn't happen? What's next for him? Crawford is a phenomenal fighter, one of the best of this generation, but he needs the right dance partner to elevate him to true superstardom. He's done everything right inside the ring, but he's never quite had that blockbuster fight to push him into mainstream recognition. Canelo would have won that fight. Now, he's left wondering what comes next. The unfortunate truth is that boxing has always been a business first and a sport second. Fans may not like it, but it's the reality of the fight game. The biggest fights aren't always the most competitive ones, they're the ones that make the most financial sense. And in this case, Canelo vs Jake Paul makes all the financial sense in the world. Now, let's talk about Jake Paul for a second. If you're skeptical about his legitimacy in boxing, you're not alone. He started off fighting fellow YouTubers and ex-MMA fighters, slowly building credibility within the sport. But the reality is, he has dedicated himself to boxing. He's training with real professionals, taking the sport seriously, and gradually proving himself in the ring. That doesn't mean he stands a chance against Canelo, but it does mean that he's earned enough respect to be in these conversations. His influence in the sport is undeniable. When he fights, people watch. When he talks, people listen. He's built a brand that transcends boxing, and that's why this fight makes sense. Whether you love him or hate him, you will watch. And that's the entire point. So, where does this leave the boxing landscape? If Canelo vs Jake Paul is truly happening, then boxing is continuing down an interesting path, one where entertainment sometimes outweighs legacy. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means the sport is evolving. But for those who wanted to see Canelo continue taking on the best of the best, this news stings. Could Canelo still have a competitive 2025? Absolutely. If he follows up the Jake Paul fight with a real challenge, perhaps against David Benavidez or the winner of the upcoming light heavyweight battles, then all is forgiven. But if this is the beginning of a trend, where the biggest fights are simply spectacles rather than tests of skill, then fans have every right to be concerned. At the end of the day, boxing is in a unique place right now. It has stars, it has storylines, but it also has an identity crisis. Are we still in the era of the best fighting the best, or are we moving into an age where crossover fights dominate the landscape? No matter what side you fall on, one thing is clear: if Canelo Alvarez and Jake Paul do step into the ring, it's going to be one of the biggest events in modern boxing. It might not be the fight purists wanted, but it will be the fight everyone talks about. And in today's boxing world, that might just be enough.